Risk analysis and contingent time. As I've mentioned before, you should do a risk analysis on the project. You would normally start early on the project and develop it during the development of your program, and as you identify risks in your program, you would add them to the risk register and work them, and you should develop additional work which will create more activities and put them in the program. So risk analysis may identify risk mitigation activities that should be added to your program. Also, contingent time would have to be added to the schedule, and this could be dependent on allowances in the estimate, so it's really important that you go and have a look at the estimate, make sure that all the work is in the estimate, is in your program, and particularly if you've got earthworks productivity activities, you might want to check on what the estimator has put in the estimate as productivity factors. Contingent time can be put into a program in a number of different ways. First of all, you can have one or more contingent activities in a schedule. A lot of contractors put a single contingent time activity at the end of the program. They call it punch list or cleanup or something like that to disguise it, and therefore this would then be reduced in duration or a negative lag put in so that it will be shortened as the project becomes later and consumes some of the contingent time. Another method is to assign work days as non-work days. I remember when I worked in the contracting industry, one contractor said that we had to put 20 non-work days into the program per year, and it had to be on a Wednesday and not next to a public holiday, and we had to have 2 in the summer, 2 in the winter, 1 in spring and autumn. That worked quite well. It doesn't mess up your cash flow, it doesn't mess up your resource histograms, and does end up extending the duration of the project, but also it's quite difficult to remove and put back in again. Another method is to increase the durations of activities by a factor. This is not particularly good in my opinion. If you've got a resource schedule, then it messes up the resource assignment. It either increases the number of hours of resource work or reduces the units per time. Therefore, I don't like to do this, and it doesn't work well. And another issue is that you may end up with activities that are not round durations, and then activities start in the middle of the day and finish in the middle of the day. Finally, some people assign positive lags between activities. This tends to hide the contingent time from the customer. So contingent time is quite difficult to put into a program. Sometimes you want to hide the contingent time from the customer. Sometimes you want to make it obvious where it is, and therefore this becomes more of a contracting decision than a scheduling decision. So once you finish your program, then you go on to formatting, printing and reporting, and displaying the schedule information so it can be clearly communicated with management. You can use functions such as grouping and sorting activities, so you can group activities under different activity codes and sort them in different orders. You can filter activities, and also there's a function called layouts, which are similar to views in Microsoft Project. And we talk about these functions at the appropriate time in this presentation. You then need to print the schedule information for management communication. It's important in your procedures that you have a file naming convention for your reports and things like that. Running reports is also another function in P6. There are basic text reports which are available, and of course if you got the web module, then there's a large number of reports available in the web module. Next, you've got to issue the plan, and you need to check that the entire scope of the project has been included in the schedule. You need to ensure the schedule has been distributed and reviewed by the project team, and you need to ensure the schedule is communicated clearly to the project stakeholders. I will go through some of the things that you need to do to check a schedule. I've got a fairly thorough checklist, and recent versions of P6 have also included a schedule checker, which is quite useful. So we'll cover issuing the plan at the appropriate point in the presentation. So if you won the contract, then you will baseline the schedule and monitor progress. And so what we're looking at here in level 2 is monitoring progress of a program without resources. So first of all, you will set the baseline. And in this picture here, I've got the baseline as this yellow bar, which is the original program. And then here we've got the blue bar, which is completed work, the red bar, which is incomplete work, and this is the data date, the date that we're updating the program. So you go out to site, you track and record progress, make sure you take photographs and that sort of thing. And then for complete activities, you enter the actual start and the actual finish into the program at the date and time that they started and finished. Activities that are in progress, you enter the actual start and the remaining duration and the % complete. And then you amend any unstarted activities, make sure the durations are correct, and reschedule, and you move the data date forward. So P6 always ensures that incomplete work is pushed in front of the data date here, which is the blue line. And it's a big advantage over products like Microsoft Project, because Microsoft Project is very easy to get incomplete work in the past or complete work in the future. P6 does allow complete work in the future, but it's not very difficult to ensure it is in the past. But the great advantage of P6 over Project is that it does push incomplete work into the future. So this is typically what a project would look like when it's had progress assigned. And you can see you have a finished variance column here, and you can see the difference here by comparing the yellow bar, which is the baseline, with the current schedule. Next thing I want to briefly talk about is scheduling with resources, roles and expenses. So I just want to explain the difference between a resource and a role. P6 is slightly different to other products. So a role is something that you can use in long-term planning if you're an IT company, and therefore a role might be a C++ programmer, or it might be a web developer person and that sort of thing. And therefore you would assign roles for long-term planning. And then when the work comes on the horizon, resources are individual people that can fill the role. And therefore you look up the resources that have that role and apply resources to roles. So roles and resources are useful when you're going to assign individual people in a P6 program to complete the work. And you'll find this often happens in business development projects and IT development projects. In the construction industry, often you don't assign individual people as resources, and therefore you tend to be sticking to crews and bricklayers and concreters and that sort of thing. And therefore roles are very rarely used in the construction industry. Expenses are where you can apply cost to activities in the same way that you can apply fixed cost in Microsoft Project, and therefore these are not roles and resources, they are just fixed costs to allow for cash flowing, but they can have quantities with them. So let's discuss it a bit further. You need to consider whether you're estimating or planning for control. So if you're estimating with P6 and any planning and scheduling software, you can put as many resources and as many expenses as you like against each individual activity, because you're not going to update them, and it doesn't take very long to assign lots of different resources. On the other hand, if you're planning for control and you're going to update each resource with the actual hours to date and hours to go, and cost to date and cost to go, you need to be very careful that you don't put an awful lot of resources in your schedule. You need to actually be very careful that you don't end up with a schedule that you can't manage. So if you are going to update your program with hours to date and cost to date and hours to go and cost to go, you need to be fairly careful or have very slick inbuilt systems. If you're an IT company and you're using the P6 timesheeting module, will that work automatically? But if you're not using the timesheeting module, you need to have a very careful think about how you're going to execute your project and update the schedule. So you need to consider the balance between the number of activities and the number of resources. You then will plan your resources. You then create and use resources. If you're using roles, you'll create and use the roles. And there is a relationship between roles and resources, and resources can be assigned to roles, and obviously resources get assigned to activities and roles can get assigned to activities as well. There is also activity type and duration type, and these decide how the number of resources or units per time change if you increase and decrease the duration of an activity. And we'll have a look at activity type and duration type. It's a little bit more complex than project, but works quite well. So then once you've assigned resources to activities, you have resource usage profiles and tables that allow you to review the resource loading, cash flows and that sort of thing. And then once you have resource profiles and or tables, then you can optimize the resources, make sure that you have enough resources, and you can take the peaks and troughs out of your resource demand. So if you have a resource schedule and you've won the contract and you're going to update your program, you do the same thing, you baseline it, record the actuals and update the schedule. So a decision needs to be made on how the actual and remaining units and costs are to be calculated. And you have two choices. These may be collected, manually entered, or imported in the software, say via the Primavera timesheeting system, or the software may be used to calculate these for you, which is the default. So the defaults in P6, if you update an activity, it will calculate the actual costs and actual units based on the remaining duration. So you or your organization need to make a decision whether you want P6 to calculate the actuals for you and therefore leave you generally with the remaining cost and hours as a useful figure, but the actuals are usually ignored in this situation. And obviously then the appropriate software options need to be selected if you want to collect and manually enter the information. So if you decide to update resources manually, import them, then you need to record and enter for each resource assignment and expense item the quantities and costs spent to date per activity, the quantities and costs required to complete the activity. And this process is very time consuming and you do need good integrated systems. At this point in time, obviously it's possible to undertake a great deal of analysis, and often earned value performance measurement is used in this situation. So I just want to run through what we've covered in Module 2. We've looked at understanding planning and scheduling software and what it can do for you. I've touched on enterprise project management. I've looked at what you need to understand about your project before you create a program, and I do recommend writing a methodology statement and make sure everybody agrees with it before you start putting a lot of work into your program. I've explained in detail level 1, planning without resources, and then I spent a little bit of time going through monitoring progress without resources, creating a program with resources, roles and expenses, and updating a program with roles and resources.